Good afternoon and welcome to The Road to Recovery, The Road to Freedom with Mark. I would just like to introduce the brains behind the outfit in the engine room. This is Michael. Welcome, Michael.
Hardly the brains, Mark, but I do some of the paperwork. I'm actually here just to test to see we've got a particular problem in the studio that doesn't affect your program because it's always to do with when you've got a guest. I've made my test. I'm satisfied that the problem is persisting and I'll leave you to do your program. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. The wonders of modern technology, I guess, is it's never smooth and it's never easy, but Michael always seems to work his way through it somehow. I don't know how. I guess he's just hard-working and persistent, and that's what you've got to be, you know. You've got to be, think on your feet and fix things as best you can. Nothing ever runs quite smoothly. You see me sitting in front of the camera and everything seems to be so easy, but I can assure you, boy oh boy, things go wrong here sometimes, and when you stuff up live, and this is live, there are no excuses and there's no way out. You kind of feel like a butterfly, etherised and pinned on a board. It's really quite something, but yeah, she's fun, all right, that's for sure. Well, welcome to The Road to Recovery. This is my 28-minute slot every Friday that I do, and we're forever growing, we're forever expanding. Over the years, this was just a little bit of a backwater, and, you know, Michael and Veronica at Arrow Radio here decided that they would bring it up to the next level, and at first they did a website, so www.arrow.co.nz. They got more sponsors on board. They put together a fantastic website, and on that website there are podcasts of the last 3 episodes of each sponsored show. So at your leisure, through the wonders of modern technology, you can tap on in there and listen to those podcasts at your leisure. There's after that, Wairarapa TV came on board, and we thank them very much for coming on board and just expanding and spreading the word. You know, Arrow Radio is the smallest of the local radio stations, and yet it boxes well above its weight because we've had people like Lucy, who's made such a fantastic contribution, and Veronica and Michael, who do an enormous amount of work behind the scenes. And New Zealand On Air, you know, sponsor us along with so many other fine sponsors, really good people, or good outfits, good individuals, not so much, but more like institutions that realise that there is something to be said for contributing towards local radio for local people. So what it's all about, and it's gone more than local. I mean, we spread from the Wairarapa all the way down from Ngawi, all the way up here into Masterton, all those great little towns in between, Ferry, Carterton, Greytown, you know, and all those other little places, Martinborough, Puranoa, all those fantastic little spots. But also now we welcome our friends from the Hawke's Bay, and I heard you had a beautiful day up there in Napier the other day when it was howling and blowing and raining everywhere else. So I know just how beautiful it is up there. I've been there many times, and I used to love walking along Marine Parade there when I was a kid. It's a place that has a special feel for me, but also I love, Hastings and Gisborne and right round to the Hawke's Bay, to the Mahia Peninsula and all that. A very, very special spot. You people are very lucky, and I feel in many ways that you're like cousins to us, you know. You're so close, and you share that East Coast and that beautiful part of the country. It's very good to have you on board, and I hope you spread the word amongst your friends about what we're doing with this show. There's all kinds of different things on this show, many and various, things you really wouldn't expect, including my show, which is about mental health. It's about me working my way through my problems, but more importantly, a lifetime's worth of experience of what it is actually like to be at the coalface, to be going through those struggles to be clinging on to life by your fingertips and feeling like you're in a world of darkness where there is no escape and there is no way out, that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness that so many people suffering from mental issues find. And it's not just one thing. It's not just depression or bipolar or obsessive compulsive disorder. Many people suffer in many different ways and to varying degrees. Some of us find that we suffer from depression intermittently and we have good times and things seem to be going all right, and then something hits you out of left field, whether it be the bust up of a relationship or the death of a friend or a loved one in your families, and that can really put the skids under you and send you spiralling into a dark place where nothing anyone can say can make it any better. And, you know, time ultimately is the only healer available to you, and you've got to somehow survive through those times. And that can be a terrible struggle. So if you are suffering from depression, my advice to you is to open your ears, to listen to, even if it's only one individual who you trust, and listen to what they have to say and give it some thought. To discuss as best you can. It is not easy, I know, to open up and talk about things that are very difficult for you. You know, when I was a young fella, there were common phrases like man up or harden up and all this sort of stuff. And those attitudes still pervade, especially amongst males in our society. Although in recent times it has become far more acceptable to realise that sometimes it's more than just being a little bit depressed for a little period of time. Sometimes people go into dangerous slumps which can be self-destructive as well as destructive for those people around them. And ultimately the bottom line is a lot of people do kill themselves as a result of feeling so lost, so hopeless that there seems to be no way out whatsoever. And that's where you can come in. If you do not suffer from mental illness, you'll be amazed what a difference a kind word or a good thought can make. You know, how it can change somebody's life around. And, you know, it can be something really, really simple. It doesn't have to be an enormously difficult thing for you to do to help somebody. It can be just going for a walk in the park together, having a cup of coffee together, you know, or sharing a meal. That's a really great way to help somebody. And you don't have to become their caregiver, just a friend, you know, just once in a while. Spend a little bit of time with someone who you know is suffering, and you don't have to solve their problems. You just have to say to them, look, I know you're going through a tough time and, you know, I want you to know I'm here. As simple as that. And then let that person who is suffering from mental illness take that next step, because it is imperative that they break themselves free rather than someone else try and lay a solution down, because when it's coming from somebody else, it's on the outside coming in. Whereas the individual suffering from mental illness, if they take that one step forward, and every one of us who has turned the corner knows that moment, that one step forward, that one thing. And for those suffering from mental illness, it is imperative that you do take that step forward and regain some degree of control. And from there, things become easier. Now, you want to start off with something small, simple and achievable. A big one for me was cleaning up my house, which kind of sounds really weird, I know. And, I mean, yeah, okay, it was a bit of a pit and could always do with a clean, but I went cray-cray and cleaned my place for like 2 weeks until it was sparkly. And the way that I felt about myself as a result of a better environment really was a huge stride forward to me, and I've been able to maintain that ever since. And it is about momentum and inertia. It's about getting over that initial inertia and getting some movement forward. And once you've got that, it is much easier to maintain once you've taken that first step, generally what tends to happen is people, especially people suffering from depression, tend to go inwards, tend to retreat inside themselves, isolate themselves and cut themselves off, and that only exacerbates the situation. It is imperative that you look outwards rather than inwards, and that is the biggest thing of all in itself, is that you just start looking out the window and allow yourself to think, what would it be like if I was happy just for one day, just one thing that made me happy? And when you find that thing, whatever it may be, then you can start making progress, and from one win comes another, and it snowballs. It has a snowball effect, and so does a detrimental effect when you start thinking negative thoughts. So above all else, it's about thinking about positive thoughts. And I put it to you that I judge our society as to how we treat those who are on the outside, on the periphery of our society, who lack definition, who lack a job. You know, when you are on a benefit, it doesn't matter whether it's unemployment or sickness benefit or whatever, life is an absolute struggle. You have nothing left over at the end of the week. If you can feed yourself, you're very, very lucky indeed. So life becomes extraordinarily difficult. It becomes not just a mental struggle, it becomes a physical and financial struggle as well. So the world seems to be piling in on problem upon problem, struggle upon struggle, and it makes such a huge difference when just one person says, hey, look, you matter, I care, and maybe just give them one decent feed. You know, my friends Keith and Cherie did that for me, and I am ever so grateful that over that tough winter I spent with them, they would have me round for dinner once a week, and what a difference it made. Right, well, timers are kicking on, and part of my show is to read my short stories. I hope one day to have them published in a book, and if you ever do see it, I'd really appreciate it if you buy that and make me a rich man, and then I could spend some of my wealth helping other people. That would be a really, really fine thing. It's a dream that I have to one day make an enormous difference in this country, and I feel like I owe this country the rest of my life. I've been so lucky and so privileged in so many ways. I've had people that have loved me, looked after me, picked me up when I was broken, and I do feel indebted to them, to this entire country, and that's why I do what I do. I want to help as many people as I can, and if I save a soul or two, well, what a magnificent thing that is. Right. We'll kick on with today's story. This is called Stewart Island on the Milford Track. Many years ago, when I was married, my wife and I took our Christmas break early and decided to head down to Stewart Island for a week. We didn't have much time, so we decided to fly as directly as possible from Wellington. Leonie was very organised and booked flights and accommodation well ahead of time. We flew directly from Wellington to Christchurch, then transferred to a smaller plane in Invercargill. We arrived in Invercargill on a Saturday, and on a Sunday, and it felt like a real step back in time to find everything closed with the exception of just one bar. We refuelled there and transferred to an even smaller plane for a flight to Stewart Island. The plane seated only about 12 people and was extremely noisy. Suddenly it became apparent just how isolated the island really was. That same plane ran out of fuel on the flight over about a year later with a loss of one life. I remember shouting over the engine noise just how concerned I was at the time we flew over. Foveaux Strait is far wider than it looks on a map, and Stewart Island looks much larger. I could not wait to get off the plane and was glad to finally see the mown grass strip. The weather was in our favour, yet I felt glad we had chosen the plane over the ferry across some bluff. We were met at the plane by a bus that drove us down to Half Moon Bay, the small community of about 500 people living permanently on the island. There were very few shops, and life mostly circulated around the pub, a new coffee shop and the Department of Conservation Information Centre. Our accommodation on Stewart Island was only a short walk up the hill from the township. It was nothing flash, but featured a bush backdrop that was full of birds. Wood pigeons and tui were especially prolific and lined up in their dozens on power lines. The bush they lived in was an extremely dense native and had not been ravaged by goats and possums like the mainland bush had been. I had never seen bush so solid, dark and foreboding. There is a track around the island, but it takes 10 days to tramp and is reputed to be very difficult and muddy. We decided instead to see what Half Moon Bay had to offer and have a relaxing time discovering for ourselves the bay's history and development. The home comforts of a good bed and a handy pub and restaurant won hands down. The restaurant featured local produce like blue cod, which is a prolific fish in these parts, and had a real melt-in-the-mouth quality. On our first day on the island, we gathered information of what was available and enjoyed the small township of Half Moon Bay and the surrounding bush. The pub was a real focal point of the town, and our dinner there was one of the finest I have ever had. Our second day was spent touring nearby points of interest by water taxi. The amount of wildlife and untouched beauty of the water and bush were unbelievable. The wildlife was particularly prolific and seemed to show little fear at our presence. At one spot we saw the remnants of a bush mill that was set up a century ago. Some skilled and determined souls had sailed a steamship in, run it aground there. They then stripped out the engine to use it for a saw pit they built. They then laid train tracks down as they felled the mature and beautiful rimu trees that grew there. They then rebuilt and refloated their ship, loaded it full of rimu logs, and sailed out, leaving behind the tracks and saw pit to be reclaimed by the bush. All around, seals, penguins, shags and other birds were prolific. It was hard to believe we were still in the same country. On the third day we went fishing on a charter boat. I was glad I had carted my own fishing gear down, as the stuff on the boat looked as if it had come off the ark. The first few spots turned up some smallish trumpeter, but then we hit a patch of blue cod. They were so prolific I was pulling them in 3 at a time and caught my legal limit in under an hour. Those with the boat's gear did not feel so well, but there was plenty to go around. Fresh blue cod is one of those meals that's hard to get sick of, and we dined like lords for days. Another day we spent on Ulva Island, which was a spot where the Department of Conservation, along with the locals' help, had been made completely pest-free. A family lived there and kept about 500 traps going to keep it so. It was a short, pleasant ferry ride to the island, and we were free to roam around for the day. It was a great privilege to see the superb wildlife around. As we wandered along quietly, kaka came crashing playfully through the bush. Red-crowned parakeets were ever present, but harder to spot high up in the trees. Weka abounded and were so tame they would pick food from my hand. The island is so abundant in native wildlife, it was a real eye-opener as to how the mainland must once have been. All too soon, our stay on Stewart Island was over, leaving a wonderful lasting impression on us. We headed to Te Anau for a night, before heading off to tramp the Milford Track. Our accommodation at Te Anau was top-notch and featured a spa bath. Leonie had the forethought to book the same place for the night we came back from the end of the track. We headed to the beginning of the Milford track by ferry, which was accompanied by an interesting history lesson by the skipper. Numbers allowed on the track each day are strictly limited, and we were only allowed one night stay in each hut along the way. On the ferry were a mixed bunch of people of various ages. One group were taking their mum, others took their kids. Our group on the ferry were the freedom walkers who stayed at the huts each night, as opposed to the guided walks done for people only wishing to do a day trip with a light pack. There was a reasonable level of fitness required to do the tramping either way, and I was worried about how hard it would be. The ferry landed on the shoreline at the beginning of the track, and each little group headed off at their own pace down a wide, flat path. The bush surrounding the pathway was pristine, and the clear streams were full of huge, fat brown trout. We were amazed by the sheer beauty of the place, and my fears were relieved by an easy 3.5-hour walk in. The pathway in was so flat and clear it wasn't necessary to watch where we were walking, and we found it impossible to stop gazing upwards at the beautiful bush and wildlife. We felt transported to another world and were glad for the easy walk in, as it gave us time to get used to the weight of our packs. The time flew by, and soon we had reached the first hut and cooked a meal in a well-outfitted kitchen. There were plenty of bunks, although there were thousands of sandflies about. We had good repellent, and all the other groups of folks seemed similarly well equipped. I was nicely tired at the end of the day and slept well in my sleeping bag despite the ever-present sandflies. The next day we had a much longer 7 to 8 hour tramp over a lot of granite and much narrower pathway. It was much more demanding going, but we both got through unscathed, although very tired, and a hot meal was fantastic at the end of the day. We didn't need a clock, as we soon adjusted to going to sleep at dark and rising at first light. The third day we tackled McKinnon Pass, which was a steep pull up a granite mountain. It was hard going, but we were rewarded at the top with a half a dozen mountain kia, who shows only a little caution, always ready to rob the unwary. Their favourite trick was to drop a camera off a cliff face and fly down to play with the broken pieces. The pass was a steep granite, low mountain pass with snow at the top, yet the kia seemed to thrive in the inhospitable environment. On the way down, we followed a clear mountain creek, steeply down uneven granite stairs. Our knees took a pounding, and we were soon complaining of the pain. It was a real hard tramp that day, and we were glad to finally get off the back of the pass. We stumbled into the hut that night and cooked up a tasty freeze-dried dinner. The rest of the tramp was a doddle in comparison, being quite flat and around small lakes. There were waterfalls coming off the tops of the hills and flowing freely down the mountain sides. It was ever so beautiful. We had by now got used to the weight of our packs and were able to keep moving for longer periods of time. We were also able to take in more of this rare and beautiful area, which had waterfalls pouring straight down off granite cliffs quickly into the lake. There were also endless numbers of sandflies in the lower regions, and I was so happy to have some decent repellent. I could only imagine how miserable it would have been without. We chewed up the final few kilometres to the last hut on the tramp. All of the huts were really well equipped. Gas made for easy cooking and boiling water, and they had plenty of good bunk beds. This enabled each group to keep to themselves, and the kids kept out of our hair. Everyone seemed to manage the tramp quite well, even the oldest mum amongst the group. Our last day on the track was about a half a day's tramp down to meet the ferry. It was a great opportunity for weary bodies to take their time and drink in the sheer beauty of the clear water and pristine bush. The good numbers of large native trees was awe-inspiring, and there were equally impressive numbers of birds that they supported. I was glad to finally reach the end of the track early and having a feed before the ferry arrived. I was tired and thoroughly thrilled that I was allowed to tramp the Milford. Its rugged beauty is really something that needs to be done to be fully appreciated. As the ferry slowly pulled away, I stayed at the back of the boat, looking back to the end of the track. It felt like we had had some type of religious experience. Such was the beauty of the rivers and the falls, and McKinnon Pass and Sutherland Falls. We met the bus and headed back to Te Anau and our much-deserved spa bath after a nice steak in town. The time seemed to fly by, and soon I was dreaming of the bush from the comfort of a good warm bed. It's funny how much you appreciate the simple luxuries of life after a few days tramping and sleeping in huts. Although it was a shame our adventure had to come to a conclusion, we were still buzzing from our experiences. Stewart Island and the Milford Track housed very different types of bush, and were wonderful and unique experiences on their own. Doing both was like having two holidays in one, and Leonie's organisation made it a wonderfully seamless experience. It has been many years now since we travelled to the far south and west to Milford, but their impression has never left me. Like photographs in my mind, the sheer pristine beauty is burned into my memory. I feel a great sense of pride and privilege to have been able to visit such wonders. I would encourage anyone to go to Stewart Island at least, and Milford if the body still allows. They are certainly places I will always remember with a sense of awe. The end. Well, 28 minutes flies, doesn't it? It's a lot of fun. I do enjoy this, and I hope you like my stories. I try and keep them many and varied. You know, I was lucky, I suppose, but more importantly, I made the decision as a young man when I was 21 to travel the world and see what it was really all about out there, because I realised how isolated we were. And, you know, I went to some funny places, Mauritius, and I spent a bit of time in Australia and then a couple of years in Africa, and 5 years I lived in London and travelled the continent right across to Turkey, and then I spent some time in Southeast Asia on the way home, in Malaysia and Thailand and the like, and I met a lot of people and I had some amazing experiences, and you know, I do miss that, but I am also very, very appreciative of the wonderful country we have and the awesome people, and I do believe that we are making this country better, and I would encourage you to do your bit if you possibly can. So thank you very much for tuning in today, and if you can, spread the good word amongst your friends and help them to enjoy this show too. Thank you, and we'll catch you again next week. Bye for now. Cheers.
Thank you.